I think we should touch this issue of metaphorical truth, because I think it still gets at the distance between us.
Sure.
Yep.
And happily, this is your phrase that you have. I mean, you might want to. Do you want to prop up this phrase?
Why not?
Yeah.
So the idea of metaphorical truth, which I think actually is the reconciliation between at least the points that you guys each started out with, is the idea that there are concepts which are literally false, that we can falsify in a scientific, rational sense, but that if you behave as if they were true, you come out ahead of where you were if you behave according to the fact that they are false. And so to call these things simply false is an error. In effect, the universe has left them true in some sense other than a purely literal one. And so religions would then, according to actually what you heard from both Sam and Jordan, religions would fall into this class of things. These are encapsulations of stories and prescriptions that if you follow them, irrespective of whether they literally describe the universe, you end up with certain advantages that you may not know why they are there, but nonetheless you are ahead of you're ahead of your position if you were to navigate just simply on your perceptions. So
Right.
that's the concept.
Yeah, so I think there's a good analogy that you and I stumbled onto after we did a podcast together. You had an analogy about a porcupine that could shoot its quills, which many people balked at, but a listener gave us a better one, which was the idea that anyone who's worked with guns at all must have heard this admonishment to treat every gun as if it is loaded, right? And you actually, last night when I alleged that you believed in God, you corrected me. You said, no, you live as if God exists, right? And so this seems like there's a connection here. So if I had a gun here that I wanted to show Brett, if I know anything about guns, I'm going to make damn sure that it's unloaded, right? I'm going to pull back the slide, I'm going to drop the magazine, pull back the slide, check the chamber, and do this in a redundant fashion that really looks like I'm suffering from obsessive compulsive disorder. I mean, it is truly redundant. And then I'll hand it to Brett, and if Brett knows anything about guns, he will do the same thing, having just seen me do it. And if he hands it back to me, again, I will do the same thing, even though there may be no ammunition around, right? So it really is crazy at the level of our explicit knowledge of the situation, and yet absolutely necessary to do. And it's not merely, it runs very deep. I mean, that whole time you're careful not to point the barrel of the gun at anything you would be afraid to shoot. And when people fail to live this way around guns, they, with some unnerving frequency, actually shoot themselves or people close to them by accident. So it is really the only proper hedge against just the odds of being in proximity to loaded weapons. And yet, if someone in the middle of this operation came up to us and said, actually there's a casino that just opened across the street that will take your bets about whether or not guns are loaded. Would you like to bet $1 million as to whether or not this gun is loaded? Well, of course, I would bet those $1 million every time that it's not loaded because I know it's not loaded. So there's a literal truth and a metaphorical truth, otherwise known as a very useful fiction, which in this case is actually more useful than the truth, right? But the only way I can understand its utility is, and even utter the phrase metaphorical truth in a way that's comprehensible, is in the context of distinguishing it from literal truth.